They say the West was built by power and force. But at Love and Scars Stories, we know it was shaped by endurance and quiet love. Today's story reveals how pain can become beauty and how broken pasts can shape unbreakable futures. In the raw heart of the Western frontier, it all began with a single moment of trust. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Sometimes the world measures a person by appearances instead of worth. Clara Boone learned that lesson early and learned it hard. On the ragged edge of Wyoming territory, she worked her late father's land alone, hauling heavy stone and raising walls with nothing but her own strength. The frontier folk had already passed judgment on her. Too big, too plain, never meant for love or partnership. Clara answered them the only way she knew how. By working, by building, by laying stone after stone until doubt had no place left to stand. That was the morning Luke Calder rode past her homestead. Luke was a widowed mountain man, carrying grief as quietly as he carried his rifle. When his eyes fell on Clara, he didn't see what the rest of the world saw. He saw resolve. He saw endurance. He saw a woman who refused to be broken. Two people the world had written off, standing on the same stretch of hard ground without knowing it yet. The autumn wind carried the smell of dying grass and distant pine as Clara bent to lift another stone from the pile beside her father's land. The rock scraped her calloused palms, heavy enough that she had to brace her legs and pull with her whole body to set it in place. It was a method learned from her father, Eli Boone, God rest him. Eli Boone had been a practical man, never one for soft words, but he taught his daughter everything he knew about land and survival. 6 months he'd been in the ground now. 6 months since the fever took him in the spring, leaving Clara alone on a claim most folks said had never been worth staking. Too rocky, they said. Too far from town. Too much work for too little reward. But Eli Boone had seen promise here, and Clara saw it too. The land lay in a shallow valley, where winter winds eased their bite, where a creek ran year-round, where the soil, once the stones were cleared, turned dark and rich. She set the rock in place and checked it by eye, just as her father had taught her. The wall was coming together clean and straight. Another week and the eastern boundary would be finished. A proper stone fence meant to last for generations. That was the point of it. Something solid, something that proved Eli Boone's daughter had been worth the raising. The town of Red Hollow sat 5 miles east, close enough for supplies and far enough that Clara could pretend its whispers didn't reach her. She knew what they said. She always had. Too large, too rough, a face like a workhorse and a body built to break wagons. The Boone girl would never marry, never have children, never amount to anything but a burden. Her father had never spoken that way. He looked at his broad-shouldered, plain-featured daughter and saw someone who could work, someone strong enough to matter. When her mother died, giving birth to a stillborn son, Eli Boone adjusted without complaint. He taught Clara to shoot, to trap, to read weather and land. He never once told her she needed to be different. Clara straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back. The labor was hard, but it was honest. She preferred honest work to false kindness. She wore her father's old leather gloves, worn thin by decades of use. They were too large, but she kept them. They still smelled of him. Leather, tobacco, sweat earned the right way. Behind her stood the cabin her father had built 20 years earlier, modest, sturdy, and paid for. One room with a loft, a stone fireplace, wooden floors, shutters tight against winter storms. It wasn't much by town standards, but it was hers. She'd proven all summer that she could manage on her own. The garden had done well. Potatoes, beans, squash, carrots. Preserves lined the shelves. Meat hung dried. 3 chickens and a milk cow kept her fed, and she traded eggs in town for flour, sugar, and coffee. The frontier folk took her goods easily enough, even if they avoided her eyes. Lillian Chen was the exception. She ran the general store with her 2 grown sons and treated Clara with a quiet respect that felt rare as rain. "Your father was a good man," Lillian Chen had said at the funeral. "You are your father's daughter." It was the finest thing Clara had ever been told. But one kind voice couldn't drown out the rest. Red Hollow had decided Clara's future long ago. Silas Crow made that clear the week before when he rode out to her homestead with an offer to buy her land. Silas Crow was a rich cattle baron who owned half the valley, and the look he gave her carried pity sharpened into contempt. "A woman alone can't hold land like this," he'd said, never bothering to swing down from his saddle. "I'll offer you a fair price, enough to settle in town. You could cook, do laundry, something more fitting." Clara Boone met his stare without blinking. "This land isn't for sale, Mr. Crow. My father claimed it fair and legal," she went on, "and I plan to keep it." Crow smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. "We'll see how steady you feel come spring, Miss Boone. Winter has a way of breaking women who stand alone." She watched him ride off and felt a chill crawl down her spine. Silas Crow was a man used to taking what he wanted. So Clara worked harder. She stayed sharp. She stayed stubborn. Day after day she raised the wall, stone by stone. Every rock she set was a vow, to her father, to herself. She would not fail. She would not prove them right. The sun stood high when she heard the horse. Clara straightened, wiping sweat from her brow, and turned toward the sound coming from the north. One rider approached on a solid, weary mare, a pack mule trailing behind. He sat his saddle with the ease of a man more comfortable on horseback than on the ground. Clara's hand drifted toward the rifle resting against the wall, not to grab it, just to remember it was there. A woman alone learned caution early. The rider slowed and lifted a hand. "Morning," he called when he drew close. "Morning," Clara answered evenly, studying him. He was older than she was. A beard trimmed rough, clothes worn but clean, tack well cared for. A hunter, maybe. A trapper. A mountain man by the look of him. He stopped at a respectful distance and nodded toward the wall. "That's fine work." Clara waited. For the remark about a woman doing a man's labor. For mockery. For the offer of help she hadn't asked for. But none came. He only studied the wall like someone who understood what it took to build it. "Straight lines," he added. "Good courses. You've got a gift for fitting stone." Something loosened in her chest. "My father taught me," she said. He nodded, as if that settled everything worth knowing. "A good teacher, then." He tipped his hat. "Name's Luke Calder. I'm riding into Red Hollow for winter supplies. Didn't mean to interrupt." "No interruption," she said, surprising herself. "Clara Boone." Luke Calder's eyes met hers, gray as creek water, worn by weather. And something passed between them she couldn't name. Not pity, not judgment. Recognition, maybe. As if he saw something others had never bothered to look for. "I'll let you get back to it, Miss Boone," he said quietly. He tipped his hat again and nudged his horse forward. Clara stood there with a stone in her gloved hands and an unfamiliar weight in her chest. He had called her work fine. He had looked at her wall the way her father would have, seeing the labor, the care, the skill. She set the stone and reached for another, but her hands weren't steady. All afternoon, as the sun crept across the sky, She kept thinking of gray eyes and a voice that spoke to her as if she mattered. That evening, sitting on the cabin steps with a supper of cornbread and beans, Clara allowed herself a feeling she had buried long ago. Not hope. Hope cut too deep. But maybe, just maybe, wonder. What if there were more men like Luke Calder? What if someone could see in her what her father had seen? She shook off the thought and went inside to bank the fire. The world was what it was. She was who she was. Still, that night, lying in the loft she'd slept in since girlhood, Clara touched the worn leather gloves hanging beside her bed and thought of steady hands, respectful words, and eyes the color of creek water. And for the first time in 6 months, she didn't feel entirely alone. Luke Calder told himself he was riding toward Red Hollow for supplies. He kept telling himself that supplies were the only reason he'd come down from the mountains early, before the first real snow set in. Kept insisting he wasn't thinking about a woman with powerful hands and eyes that carried more loneliness than any one person should bear. It had been a lie for 3 days now. His camp sat half a mile from the Boone homestead, hidden among tall pines where no firelight could be seen from the cabin. He'd pitched his tent, hobbled both horse and mule, and spent 3 long evenings by the flames, with a cup of coffee gone cold in his grip, circling thoughts he'd sworn he'd buried for good. A leather cord hung around his neck, holding a gold wedding ring. His fingers found it without thought, the same way they had for 3 years. Mary's ring. He'd slipped it from her hand before they lowered her into the ground, unable to leave it buried. His own band still rested on his finger, a weight so familiar he barely felt it anymore. Mary had died in childbirth, the memory of it still cutting through his sleep. The baby, a girl they'd barely managed to name Rose, had lived only 2 hours. Long enough for Luke Calder to hold her, to study her tiny face, to watch the light fade from eyes that had never truly opened on the world. Then Mary followed, bleeding away despite the midwife's efforts, despite every prayer Luke had forced from his lungs. That had been 3 years ago, in another life. He'd been a different man then, 39 but younger inside, full of plans and the stubborn belief that a good life could be built with work and faith alone. The cabin he'd built for Mary still stood high in the mountains, but he couldn't bring himself to live there. He stayed when storms trapped him, but most days he trapped, hunted, and drifted through the wilderness, like a ghost haunting his own past. He'd thought solitude was what he wanted. He'd believed silence might heal what broke the day he buried his wife and daughter in the same grave. But 3 years in the high country had taught him otherwise. Silence didn't heal. It only meant there was no one left to hear you ache. Then he'd ridden past the Boone homestead and seen Clara Boone lifting stone. He'd stopped without meaning to, struck still by the sight. She was a big woman, broad, tall, solid in a way that reminded him of the mountains themselves. But it wasn't her size that held him. It was how she moved, steady, certain, like she knew exactly what she was doing and didn't need permission from anyone alive to do it. The stone she lifted would have made most men hesitate. She'd crouched low, set her hands, braced herself, and lifted with legs and back in one smooth motion. Then she carried it to the wall and fitted into place like she'd been born, knowing how to build something meant to last. It brought Mary to mind. Not in looks. Mary had been small, quick, dark-haired. But in spirit. Mary had been the kind of woman who decided something needed doing and simply did it, whether the world approved or not. She'd chosen to marry a mountain trapper and made a home finer than anything in town. She'd chosen to bear a child at 37 despite the danger, facing it with more courage than Luke had found in himself since. Clara Boone carried that same iron spine wrapped in quiet resolve. When Clara had turned to look at him, waiting for whatever judgment he might pass, Luke saw something else, raw, honest, and painfully familiar. Loneliness, the kind that comes from standing among people who think they already know your worth before you ever speak. He knew that loneliness because he wore it himself, bound tight in grief until he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as more than a broken man. So he'd said the only thing that came to him, the truth. Her work was fine, better than fine. The way her eyes softened before she guarded herself again had stayed with him for 3 days. Now morning had come, and Luke was tightening his saddle, trying to convince himself to ride on to Red Hollow like he'd planned. Supplies wouldn't gather themselves. Winter was closing in. There was work to be done. Yet his hands paused on the saddle's cinch, and his gaze drifted south, through the trees, back toward the Boone homestead. There was a flaw in that wall. Luke Calder had seen it the moment he rode past. A place where the stones hadn't settled true, where time and weather would worry at it until it gave way. Not this year, maybe not the next. But eventually it would fail. And when it did, whoever built it would have to tear out a whole stretch and begin again. Luke had learned stonework from his father, who'd learned it from his own before him. The Calder men had been builders long before they ever turned trappers back in Pennsylvania. Luke could read a wall the way other men read tracks. He didn't just see what it was. He saw what it would become once frost, rain, and gravity had their say. He ought to tell her about the weak spot. That was just neighborly. Nothing more than that. He finished tightening the saddle, loaded his pack mule, and scattered dirt over the ashes of his fire. Then he turned south. Clara Boone was already working when he arrived, the sun barely lifting over the land. She'd made real progress since the day before, another 10 feet at least. She heard him and turned, and Luke watched the familiar play of expressions cross her face. First fatigue, then recognition, then something more dangerous, something that might have been hope, if hope weren't such a risk. "Morning, Miss Boone," he called, stopping at the same careful distance. "Morning," she answered. Her tone was level, and this time she didn't glance toward the rifle. That felt like something earned. Luke dismounted and looped the reins over a scrub oak. "I noticed something yesterday," he said, moving slowly toward the wall. "Didn't want to overstep, but it's been sitting wrong with me." Her shoulders tightened. "What is it?" He pointed. "There. See how that stone's set? It's holding now, but when the ground thaws come spring, it'll shift. When it does, it'll pull the courses above it right down." She stepped closer, near enough that he caught the smell of wood smoke and sweat. She studied the wall hard, and he watched understanding dawn in her eyes. Her jaw set. "I thought I had it right," she said quietly. "It's not wrong," Luke said. "Just not finished. Could be better. I could show you if you want. Wouldn't take more than an hour or two to reset it the right way." She turned to him then, really looked at him, and the weight of her gaze settled heavy on his chest. She was searching for something. Mockery, maybe, or pity, or that soft cruelty people used when they meant to tell you you weren't enough. "Why?" she asked. It was a fair question. Luke thought about it, his fingers brushing the ring beneath his shirt without him noticing. Why did it matter to him if this wall stood or fell? "Because good work deserves to last," he said at last. "And because I've got time before I head into town." He paused, surprised by his own words, then spoke them anyway. "And because you remind me of someone who mattered to me. Someone who would have liked you." Her eyes widened just a little. He saw her swallow. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she nodded once, clean, decisive. "I'd appreciate the help," she said. "And the teaching, if you're willing." "Luke," he said gently. If we're working side by side, you might as well use my name. Clara, she replied. There was something in the way she said it, plain, honest, like an offering, that tightened his chest. They worked through the morning together. Luke showed her how to read the grain of the stone, how to find its balance, how to seat each piece so it locked with the next and held for decades. Clara learned fast, her hands steady, her mind sharper than she let most people see. She asked questions that mattered and listened to the answers. Luke found himself talking more than he had in months, maybe years. They didn't speak of anything important, just stone and weather, sore muscles, and how willow bark tea eased the ache after a long day. Yet beneath the simple talk, something shifted, a recognition. Two people who had walked alone for a long time, realizing they were no longer walking separate paths. When the sun stood high, Clara straightened and studied the repaired section. That's going to hold, she said, satisfaction in her voice. It will, Luke agreed. You've got good instincts. Just needed someone to show you the finer points. She turned to him, and there was something on her face he hadn't seen before. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it might have been the doorway to it. Will you? Clara Boone began, then stopped and tried again. I'm starting on the north wall next. She hesitated only a breath. If you've got more time before heading to town, I wouldn't mind someone looking over my work, making sure I'm doing it right. Luke Calder knew what she was really asking. She was asking if he would stay, if he would come back tomorrow and the day after, if this fragile, unexpected thread between them was something he meant to follow, or if he was just another man passing through her life. Luke thought of his empty camp, his abandoned cabin, the long, hollow years stretching ahead. He thought of Mary Calder's ring on the cord at his neck and the band still circling his finger. He thought of the way Clara's eyes had lit when the stone finally seated true, the clean joy of learning something useful, something meant to last. I'll come back tomorrow, he said at last. If that's all right with you. It is, Clara answered softly. It's more than all right. That evening, back at camp, Luke set his hat aside and leaned against a pine, staring into the fire. The ring felt heavier than usual. After a long moment, he pulled it free and studied it. Gold worn smooth, their wedding date etched inside. I'm not forgetting you, Mary, he said to the dark. I'll never forget you or Rose. But I think you'd understand this. Maybe you'd want me to stop being so alone. The fire snapped. Wind moved through the trees, and for the first time in 3 years, something like hope stirred in Luke Calder's chest. Painful, frightening, as unsteady as a newborn finding its feet. But it was there. Tomorrow he would ride back to the Boone place and help Clara raise her wall. And maybe, just maybe, begin building something of his own. October sharpened into the kind of cold that warned of worse to come. Aspens flared gold on the hills, then shed their leaves to the wind. Mornings brought ice on the water bucket. Clara's garden was finished now, the last squash and potatoes tucked into the root cellar. Work on the wall turned urgent. They needed it done before the ground locked hard with frost. Luke stopped pretending he'd ride into town any day. His camp remained, tent pitched, fire ring built. But more nights than not, he accepted Clara's invitation to supper. They ate at Eli Boone's table and talked about nothing and everything until the fire burned low and Luke finally rode back into the dark. He brought small things, claiming they were happenstance. A whetstone for her knives, fresh venison, coffee beans traded for on the rare trip to Red Hollow. And one evening, a wooden button he'd carved to replace the missing one on her coat. Clara turned the button in her palm, studying the simple flower cut into it, a mountain primrose from the high country. It was beautiful and unnecessary, and it tightened her throat. "You didn't have to do this." Luke shrugged, suddenly awkward. "That missing button bothered me. Had time in the evenings." He didn't say he'd spent 3 nights by the fire getting the petals right, the holes clean. He didn't say he'd thought of her the whole time. Clara sewed the button on, and while Luke tightened a loose hinge on the cabin door. The ease of it surprised them both. The quiet rightness of sharing space, each busy with a task, together. It felt like marriage, or what marriage ought to be. Steady competence, mutual care. But the calm didn't last. Silas Crow arrived on a Tuesday, riding up with 2 Crow iron hands at his flanks. Clara and Luke were on the north wall when the hoofbeats came. Crow sat his horse like a man who owned the world and waited for it to agree. He was polished handsome, dark hair silvered at the temples, clothes costly, a smile that never reached his eyes. He looked at the wall and at Clara and Luke standing together, and his gaze sharpened. "Miss Boone," he said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I see you found yourself some help." "Mr. Crow?" Clara replied evenly. Crow's eyes slid to Luke, dismissive and measuring all at once. "And who might you be?" Silas Crow asked. Luke called her Trapper. Crow said it the way a man named Vermin. "I've heard of you. Living wild in the mountains, keeping clear of civilization." His smile thinned to something sharp. "Must be quite a change spending time down here, though I suppose even mountain men appreciate a warm meal." He paused, letting the word linger. "Company." Luke felt Clara Boone stiffen beside him, felt her readying herself for whatever Crow meant to suggest. He stepped forward instead, placing himself deliberately between her and the mounted man. "State your business, Crow," Luke said, his voice flat and cold. Crow's smile stayed in place, but something dark flashed in his eyes. "My business is with Miss Boone. I've come to renew my offer for her land." He gestured toward the wall. "In fact, I'm willing to increase it, given the effort she's put in. Call it compensation." "I told you already," Clara said, stepping around Luke to face him head-on. "This land isn't for sale." "Be sensible, Miss Boone," Crow replied, his tone turning indulgent. "Winter's coming. You're alone out here. Well, mostly." He leaned forward slightly. "What happens when your friend rides back to his mountains? When the snow falls and the work turns brutal? A woman alone can't hold a homestead through a Wyoming winter." "I'm not alone," Clara said firmly. Crow looked between them, his expression souring. "I see. That does change things." His gaze flicked pointedly to Luke's wedding band. A widow, or close enough, and an unmarried woman spending their days and nights together on an isolated claim. Some folks might find that improper. "Get off my land," Clara said, her voice shaking now with anger. "I'm only concerned for your reputation," Crow replied smoothly. "You know how it is in Red Hollow. Reputation is everything. Without it, you're nothing. Just a large, lonely woman no one wants and no one respects." He leaned closer in the saddle. "Sell me the land. Take the money. Move somewhere comfortable. Somewhere you don't have to pretend to be something you're not." Luke moved before thinking, grabbing the bridle. "You've said enough. Ride out now before I forget my manners." The Crow iron hands tensed, hands drifting toward their gun belts, but Crow raised a hand to stop them. He looked down at Luke with cool calculation. "You're making a mistake, Calder. Both of you are. This land belongs with my ranch, and it will be." He wrenched his horse free. One way or another. Winter's dangerous. Accidents happen. Wolves come down. Fires start. People get hurt. "That a threat?" Luke asked quietly. "Just an observation," Crow said. "Nature can be cruel to those who don't know their place." He turned his horse and rode off, his men following. The threat lingered behind him, heavy and unmistakable. Clara stood rigid, fists clenched. Luke saw her shaking, whether from fear or fury, he couldn't tell. When he reached for her, she turned into him, pressing her face to his chest. "He's going to try to take it," she said. "He's going to take everything." "No," Luke said, holding her tight. "He won't. I won't let him." "You can't fight him," she whispered. "He's got money and men. And we've got each other," Luke cut in. "And right on our side." He pulled back enough to look at her. And stubbornness. He met her eyes. "He underestimates you, Clara." "That's his mistake," Luke Calder said quietly. "He sees a woman standing alone and thinks that means weakness. I know better. You're the strongest person I've ever met." Clara Boone's eyes shone with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "I'm afraid of losing this place." "Of losing?" she faltered. "Losing what?" "This," Clara whispered. "You, us. Whatever it is we're building here." Luke lifted her face in his hands, his rough palms warm against her cheeks. "You're not going to lose me. I'm not going anywhere, Clara. Not now. Not ever. If you'll have me." The words hung between them, heavy with promise. They both understood what he was offering. Not just help, not just companionship. Something deeper, something meant to last. "Luke," Clara began. He shook his head. "You don't have to answer right now. I just needed you to know this. Whatever comes, we face it together. You're not alone anymore." Clara rose onto her toes and kissed him. It wasn't the brief, uncertain touch they'd shared before. This was fuller, truer, a claiming and a surrender at the same time. Luke drew her closer, and she came willingly. And for a long moment the world narrowed until there was nothing but the two of them. When they finally parted, breathless, Clara rested her forehead against his. "Together," she said. "Whatever comes." "Together," Luke answered. But as the sun slipped low and Luke rode back to his camp that night, they both knew the trouble with Silas Crow was only beginning. Men like him didn't let go. They took what they wanted, no matter who they crushed along the way. The question wasn't if Crow would strike again, but how far he would go, and how two people could defend what they were building when the forces against them were so much stronger. As Luke rode, he touched the ring hanging from the cord at his neck. Then carefully, he removed it and placed it in his saddlebag. Not discarding it. Never that. Just setting it aside. Making room for something new. For Clara. For the life they might shape together. For a future no longer haunted by the past, but bright, solid, and worth fighting for. The first snow came early in November. Soft flakes that melted as they fell, promising harsher weather soon. Luke and Clara worked with renewed urgency, racing the season to finish the wall. They were close now. Another week, maybe less if the weather held. Luke knew he was running out of reasons to sleep in his camp. Soon the snow would make it impossible. He would have to return to his mountain cabin, or face what that choice truly meant. The question lingered as he worked beside Clara. What were they to each other? What would this become when winter forced a decision? That evening, after a quiet meal, Luke fed the fire in the hearth and sat in Eli Boone's old chair. Clara settled on the floor beside him, leaning against his legs as they watched the flames in silence. Luke's hand rested on her shoulder, his thumb moving in slow, absent circles. "I've been thinking," Luke said at last. "That's never good," Clara teased, though tension edged her voice. She knew what was coming. "I need to ride up to my cabin," Luke said, "before the snow gets too deep. Gather my things, bring them down." He hesitated. "If that's all right with you." Clara looked up at him. "Bring them down where?" Luke met her gaze. "Here, if you'll have me. Not just as a hired hand or a friend, Clara." He drew a breath. "As your husband, if you'll say yes." Her eyes widened. "Luke, I know it's fast," he said quickly. "I know we've only had a few weeks. But I know this is real. What I feel for you is real. It's not the same as what I had with Mary. But it's no less true. You brought me back to life. You reminded me that living is worth the pain." "I can't replace her," Clara said softly. "I'm not asking you to," Luke replied. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. When he opened it, Clara saw a cameo brooch, old, delicate, beautifully made. "This was Mary's," Luke said. "Her mother gave it to her on our wedding day." Clara Boone started to pull back, but Luke caught her hand. "Wait," he said softly. "Let me finish. I want you to have this, not because you're replacing Mary, but because she would want you to have it. She would have liked you, Clara." His voice thickened. "She would have seen what I see, strength, kindness, courage, and she would have wanted me to be happy again." He swallowed. "She told me so near the end. Made me promise I'd find a way to live after she was gone." Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm brave enough." "You're the bravest person I know," Luke said. He slid from the chair and knelt beside her, the brooch still in his hand. "You've been brave your whole life. Brave enough to keep going when everyone said you weren't enough. Brave enough to build something out of nothing. Brave enough to let me in when you had every reason to keep your walls high." "I'm scared," Clara admitted. "So am I," Luke said quietly. "Terrified, if I'm honest. Scared I'll fail you. Scared something will happen and I'll lose you the way I lost Mary. Scared I don't deserve a second chance." He cupped her face. "But I'm more afraid of walking away, of riding back to an empty cabin and spending my life wondering what might have been." Clara closed her eyes and leaned into his touch. When she opened them, the decision was already made. "Yes," she said. Luke's breath caught. "Yes?" "Yes," she said again, steady now. "I'll marry you. You can bring your things here." "Yes, to all of it." She managed a tearful smile. But Luke called her, "If you ever make me regret this." He kissed her before she could finish. Pulling her close, the cameo pressed between them. This kiss was different, full of promise and commitment, the weight of vows felt before they were spoken. When they finally drew apart, both breathing hard, Luke fastened the brooch to Clara's dress, his fingers fumbling with the clasp. "I'll take care of you," he promised. "I'll work hard, stay true, and build a life with you worth having." "I'll do the same," Clara said. "Fair warning, I'm stubborn, I don't suffer fools, and I'll probably drive you half mad." "Good," Luke said with a grin. "I'd be bored otherwise." They sat together by the fire, Clara in Luke's arms, planning what came next. They'd finish the wall before the snow set deep. Luke would ride to his mountain cabin, bring down what he needed, and close it for the season. They'd marry before winter took hold. Simple, with Lily and Chen and a few others as witnesses. Then they'd face their first winter together, learning each other's ways, building a partnership meant to last. "What about Silas Crow?" Clara asked at last. Luke's jaw set. "We'll deal with him, together. Whatever he tries, we'll be ready." Clara nodded against his chest. She believed him. More than that, she believed in them. Alone, they were strong. Together, they might be unbreakable. Later, after Luke reluctantly rode back to his camp, Clara sat at the table and held the cameo up to the lamplight. Ivory carved into a woman's profile, gold setting warm in her palm. She thought of the woman who had worn it before her, the woman Luke had loved and lost. She felt no jealousy. How could she? Mary had shaped the man Luke was, had loved him into the kind of heart capable of this deep, steady bond. Without Mary, there would be no Luke for Clara to love. What she felt instead was gratitude. She touched the brooch gently, like a blessing. "Thank you," she whispered to the woman she'd never meet. "Thank you for loving him well. I promise I will too." Outside, the snow fell heavier. Winter was coming, but Clara was no longer afraid. Whatever came, snow, hardship, or Silas Crow's schemes, she would not face it alone. She had Luke called her, and that changed everything. The morning after their engagement, Clara Boone and Luke worked with a fresh urgency, finishing the last stretch of wall before noon. When they stepped back, stone circled the homestead in a clean, unbroken line. Level, solid, built to stand for generations. "It's done," Clara said, awe threading her voice. "It's perfect," Luke answered, drawing her close. "Just like you." They were still there, arms around each other, when hoofbeats sounded, one rider, steady and unhurried. Luke stiffened at once, thinking of Silas Crow, but the man who came out of the trees was a stranger. Thin, uneasy, dressed in a city suit dulled by travel dust. "Miss Boone?" the man called, reining in. "That's right," Clara said, stepping forward. Luke stayed at her shoulder. The stranger dismounted and took a leather satchel from his saddle. "My name is Edwin Pike. I'm a surveyor with the Territorial Land Office." He produced papers. "I'm here to verify your property boundaries." Cold spread through Clara's stomach. "On whose authority?" "The territorial government, ma'am. A complaint was filed regarding disputed lines." Pike shifted, uncomfortable. "By law, I'm required to conduct a survey when that happens. Let me guess," Luke said evenly. "Crow filed it." Pike didn't answer. He didn't need to. They watched for 3 long hours as Pike walked the land, checked landmarks against old documents, took careful measurements, and marked angles with practiced precision. He made notes in a leather-bound journal, thorough to a fault. Finally, he returned to the cabin. "I'm afraid I have bad news, Miss Boone," Pike said, eyes fixed on the ground. "According to your father's original claim, the northern boundary was the creek known as Willow Run, but Willow Run has shifted its course over the last 20 years. Clara felt the world tip. "What does that mean?" Pike unfolded a map and pointed. "The current creek bed lies roughly 200 yards south of where it ran when your father filed his claim. By present boundaries, your cabin sits outside the original parcel. On land, Mr. Crow asserts belongs to his ranch." "That's impossible," Clara said, her voice trembling. "My father built this cabin 20 years ago. This has always been our land." "I know this is hard," Pike said quietly. But the law is clear. Water boundaries follow the current course, not the historical one. When a creek moves, the line moves with it. Luke took the map, studying it hard. This doesn't add up. I've walked this ground. Willow Run couldn't have shifted that far in 20 years. That kind of change would take... He stopped, understanding flashing in his eyes. Unless someone diverted it. Pike went pale. I wouldn't know anything about that. Wouldn't you? Luke's voice dropped, dangerous. How much did Crow pay you to file this? I resent that, Pike snapped, though his hands shook as he gathered his papers. I'm doing my job. The survey is accurate. I'll file my report with the territorial office. You'll be notified when a hearing is set. He mounted quickly. I'm sorry, Miss Boone. Truly. Then he rode off. Clara and Luke stood in front of the cabin, suddenly unsure if it was hers at all. Clara's legs gave way, and she sat hard on the steps. Luke crouched before her, taking her hands. We'll fight this. There has to be a way. With what? Clara whispered, hollow. I don't have money for lawyers or fees. If this goes to territorial court, Crow will bring expensive counsel, and I'll have nothing. Clara Boone looked at the cabin, the land, the wall they had just finished raising. He's going to take it all. No, Luke Calder said fiercely. He won't. We'll find a way. There has to be proof. Records, something, Clara said. She pulled her hands free and walked to the wall. Pressing her palm to the stone, she felt its weight and permanence. Maybe this is the world telling me I was wrong to hope, wrong to think I could have this. She swallowed. A home, a future, you. Her voice broke. Maybe I should sell to Silas Crow and be done with it. Luke was behind her in an instant, turning her to face him. Don't you dare, he said. Don't you dare give up now. This is your land, Clara, your father's land. And I'll be damned if I let Silas Crow steal it with crooked surveys and bought lawyers. How do you know the survey's false? She asked. Because I know this ground now too, Luke said. I've walked every inch with you. That creek hasn't moved 200 yards. Maybe 20 feet, 30 at most. Crow's lying, and he's paying that surveyor to dress it up. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to fight. But she was exhausted, tired of proving herself, tired of pushing against a world that had already decided she wasn't enough. I have savings, Luke said. 30 years of trapping. It isn't much, but it could hire a lawyer. Buy us time. No, Clara said sharply. I won't take your money. I won't let you sacrifice. It isn't a sacrifice if it's for us. Luke cut in. This isn't just your fight anymore. We're partners now. What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine. That's what marriage means. We're not married, Clara whispered. Then let's fix that, Luke said. Today. We ride into Red Hollow, find a preacher, and make it right. Then Crow faces both of us. Whatever comes, we face it together. Clara looked at him. This man who had walked into her life by chance, who had seen her when no one else bothered, who was offering everything he had without hesitation. You're sure? She asked. I've never been more certain of anything, Luke said. Then Clara paused. Wait. She hurried into the cabin and returned with an old, leather-bound Bible. My father's, she said, flipping pages. He kept records, maps. She pulled out a yellowed, folded paper. His original survey. Luke took it carefully and unfolded it, eyes scanning Eli Boone's neat handwriting. The landmarks, the distances. There it was, unmistakable. Willow Run Creek, marked by the standing twin oaks on the north bank. The Twin Oaks, Luke breathed. They're still there, Clara, on what's now the south side of the creek. So the creek did move, Clara finished. But not as far as Pike claimed, maybe 50 feet, 60. She studied the map, hope flickering. My father had witnesses. See? She pointed to a signature. Wei Chen witnessed the survey. Lillian Chen's husband. Luke gripped her shoulders, a fierce grin breaking through. This is it. This is what we need. Your father's original map, dated, witnessed. We can prove Pike's survey is wrong. But will it be enough? Clara asked. Crow has money and influence. And we have the truth, Luke said. That has to count for something. Clara looked down at the map, at her father's careful hand, at the proof that might save everything he'd left her. Then she looked at Luke. The man who chose to stand with her when walking away would have been easier. Okay, Clara Boone said. We fight. Together, Luke Calder replied. Together, Clara agreed. As they stood there, laying out their next steps, neither of them noticed the shadow lingering at the edge of the trees. A man crouched low, one of the Crow iron hands, sent to watch the surveyors work. He had heard everything. He turned his horse and rode hard for the ranch, carrying news that Clara Boone had proof. Proof that could unravel everything. Silas Crow was not a man who tolerated obstacles. When his rider finished reporting, Crow's expression cooled into something sharp and deliberate. If Clara Boone possessed documents that contradicted the surveyor's findings, those papers would need to vanish. And if Clara Boone herself stood in the way, well, accidents happened, especially to stubborn women who refused to know when to quit. Crow summoned his foreman and spoke in a low voice. Instructions were given, precise and final. By morning, one way or another, the Clara Boone problem would be resolved. The land would be his, as it should have been from the start. And if Luke Calder was hurt trying to protect her, that was his own doing, for involving himself in matters beyond his station. Crow poured a whiskey and stood at the window of his ranch house, staring toward the Boone homestead. By this time tomorrow, it would be finished. The land would belong to him, and Clara Boone would finally learn what Crow had always known. Some people were meant to own, and others were meant to lose. He lifted his glass in a private toast. To victory, to ownership, to taking what he wanted, no matter the cost. They rode into Red Hollow at dawn, Clara clutching her father's Bible with the precious map hidden inside, Luke riding close at her side. The town was just waking, chimney smoke rising, shop doors opening. Early risers paused to stare, and Clara could see the judgment already forming in their eyes. The Boone woman and the mountain man, riding together before sunrise. Gossip would be spreading by noon. Let them talk. She had larger concerns now. Lillian Chen was sweeping the boardwalk in front of her store when they arrived. One look at their faces made her set the broom aside. Come inside, she said. In the back room of the general store, surrounded by sacks of flour and coffee, Clara spread Eli Boone's map across a cleared counter. Lillian studied it closely, then rested her fingers on the signature at the bottom. My husband witnessed this, she said. I remember the day. Wei Chen came home and told me Eli Boone did everything proper, everything legal. He was proud to be asked. Would you testify to that? Luke asked. In front of the territorial judge? Lillian's jaw tightened. Against Silas Crow? He owns half this town, Mr. Calder. He could ruin me. He's trying to steal Clara's land, Luke said. Her home. Everything her father built. Lillian looked at Clara for a long moment, then back at the map. My husband believed in doing what was right. she said finally, even when it was dangerous, especially then. She nodded once. Yes, I will testify. Relief washed through Clara. Thank you. Thank you so much. When is the hearing? Lillian asked. We don't know yet, Clara admitted. The surveyor said we'd receive notice, but we don't trust Crow to play fair. Smart, Lillian said. You need to file a counterclaim immediately. Force a hearing before Crow tightens his grip. She went to a small desk and pulled paper and pen. I'll write a sworn statement to accompany your father's map, and I'll send a telegram to my nephew in the territorial capital. He works as a clerk in the land office. He'll make sure your claim is seen. Luke and Clara exchanged a look. They had come hoping for testimony. They hadn't expected an ally or a strategist. Why are you helping us? Clara asked quietly. Lillian met her gaze, something gentler crossing her face. Because my husband and I came to this territory with nothing. No money, no friends, no language. People treated us like we didn't belong. But your father gave us credit when no one else would. She touched the map again. He treated us with respect. And I see that same strength in you, Clara Boone. You deserve to keep what's yours. They spent the next hour laying out a plan. Lillian Chen wrote her sworn statement while Luke Calder drafted a formal counterclaim, using language he remembered from his father's dealings with land offices back in Pennsylvania. Clara Boone watched them work and felt something she hadn't known in a long time. Community. Support. The steady knowledge that she wasn't standing alone anymore. By mid-morning, everything was ready. Lillian's eldest son rode out to send the telegram, while they prepared the documents for the land office agent who came through Red Hollow once a month. Unfortunately, he wouldn't return for another week. We could go to the territorial capital ourselves, Luke suggested. File in person. That's 3 days there and 3 days back, Clara said. What about the homestead? If we leave it empty, Crow could burn it down and call it an accident. Luke grimaced. You're right. We can't both go. Then I will, Clara said. You stay and protect the place. Absolutely not, Luke replied flatly. I'm not letting you ride 6 days alone through country where Crow has friends and influence. They were still arguing when the store door opened and a familiar voice called out, Heard you might need help. Clara turned to see Reverend Amos Reed, the Methodist minister who had presided over her father's funeral. He was a solid man in his 50s, kind-eyed, with a spine of steel hidden beneath his gentle manner. Reverend, Clara said, startled. Mrs. Chen sent word, he said. Told me what Silas Crow is trying to pull. He folded his arms. I won't abide theft, even when it's dressed up in legal papers. Your father was a good man, Miss Boone. This town owes him better than letting his daughter be robbed. We need someone to ride to the territorial capital, Luke said. Someone Crow can't threaten or buy. The Reverend smiled. I was planning to visit our church offices there next week. I can leave today, if the cause is just. He glanced at the documents. And this cause is just. Tears pricked Clara's eyes. Thank you. Thank your father, Reverend Reed said. He helped build our church, gave lumber and labor when we had nothing. It's time to return the favor. He gathered the papers carefully. I'll ride out within the hour. I should reach the capital by Saturday evening and file first thing Monday. After he left, Clara and Luke stood on the boardwalk, watching him ride away with her entire future tucked into his saddlebags. What now? Clara asked. Now we go home, Luke said. We wait, and we prepare for whatever Crow tries next. They bought supplies from Lillian, ammunition, lamp oil, extra food, then rode back to the homestead, arriving early afternoon. The place looked untouched, but Luke took no chances. He spent the rest of the day checking the land, watching for signs of intrusion, setting up a watch. That night they slept in shifts, one always awake. "This isn't a life," Clara said during Luke's watch, sitting beside him on the steps with a rifle across her lap. "It's temporary," Luke said, "once the hearing happens." "If the judge rules in our favor," Clara corrected. "He will," Luke said, with confidence he didn't fully feel. "We have evidence, witnesses, the truth, and Crow has money and power," Clara said softly. "Luke, what if—" She stopped. "What if what?" he asked. "What if we lose?" she whispered. "What if the judge rules against us and I lose the land?" Luke was quiet for a long moment, then took her hand. "Then we start over, somewhere else, new land, new home. As long as we're together, we can build anything." "You'd do that?" Clara asked. "Give up your mountain cabin, your whole life, for me?" "In a heartbeat," Luke said. "That cabin is just wood and stone. My life before you was just surviving." He gestured at the homestead, at her, at the space they shared. "This is living, and I'm not giving it up without a fight." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat together in the darkness, listening to the quiet sounds of the frontier night. The night itself seemed to listen. Wind whispered through the grass, their breathing settled into the same rhythm. Two lives aligning into one purpose, one future. The attack came 3 nights later. Luke Calder woke to the smell of smoke. He was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, shaking Clara Boone awake. "Fire," he said, outside. They burst into the cold to find the hay pile behind the barn ablaze, flames already licking toward the wooden walls. Luke ran for buckets while Clara beat at the fire with a soaked blanket. They worked in frantic silence, knowing that if the barn caught, the whole homestead could go. It took nearly an hour to bring the blaze under control. By then they were both coughing, streaked with soot, muscles shaking from exhaustion. The barn stood, scorched but intact. The hay pile was gone. "An accident?" Clara asked, though she already knew. "No," Luke said grimly. He pointed to marks in the dirt. Kindling stacked, lamp oil poured to make it burn hot and fast. Clara's hands clenched. "Crow." "His men," Luke agreed. "This is a warning. Next time they won't stop with hay." They watched until dawn, but no one returned. As the sky lightened, Luke surveyed the damage and made his choice. "I'm riding into Red Hollow. I'm filing a complaint with the sheriff." "The sheriff won't do anything," Clara said, bone-tired. "Silas Crow probably bought him." "Maybe," Luke said. "But I want it on record. I want everyone to know we know who did this." He touched her cheek. "Stay inside. Keep the rifle close. I'll be back by noon." She watched him ride away, fear tightening her chest. She had already lost so much: her mother, her father, nearly her home. Losing Luke was unthinkable. No. They were going to win. They had to. Inside, she took out her father's map and studied it again until every detail lived in her bones. The Twin Oaks, the creek's bend, the witness signature. This map was their weapon and their shield. She pinned Mary Calder's cameo to her dress, feeling its weight like a blessing. 2 women who had loved the same man, separated by death, joined by the belief that love could endure, could change, could build something new without erasing what came before. "Help me," Clara whispered, to Mary's memory, to Eli Boone's spirit, to whatever listened. "Help me keep this. Help me keep him. Help me be strong. Clouds gathered on the horizon. A storm was coming. When Luke returned just after noon with bad news, the sheriff, Clay Turner, had refused to act. Silas Crowe had an alibi. No one would help. Something hardened in Clara's chest. Fine. They would stand alone. They had both done it all their lives. At least now they were alone together. Judge Samuel Crowe struck his gavel, and the room fell silent. This hearing will determine the validity of land boundaries for the homestead claimed by Eli Boone, deceased, now occupied by his daughter, Clara Boone. Mr. Crowe, you filed the complaint. Present your case. Silas Crowe rose, smooth and assured. His lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Carlson, unfurled maps, cited measurements, quoted precedents with polished certainty. Edwin Pike, the surveyor, testified that Willow Run had shifted 200 yards, placing the Boone cabin on disputed land. It sounded precise, convincing. Clara felt her resolve waver as she searched the judge's face. Then it was her turn. She stood, knees unsteady, and stepped forward. She set her father's Bible on the table and opened it to the folded map inside. Your Honor, this is my father's original survey, made when he claimed the land 20 years ago. Her voice was quiet and steady. It marks Willow Run by twin oak trees on the north bank. Those trees still stand, Your Honor. They're on what is now the south edge of the creek. Yes, the creek moved, Clara Boone said steadily, but not 200 yards, maybe 50 feet, 60 at most. Judge Samuel Crowe studied the map in silence, his fingers tracing the careful lines. Who witnessed this survey? Wei Chen, Your Honor, Clara replied. Mrs. Chen's late husband. She is present today and can testify to his character and to the validity of this document. Lillian Chen was called forward. She spoke with calm certainty, explaining how her husband had witnessed the survey, how Eli Boone had measured and recorded with care, how the map was genuine. Carlson attempted to undermine her, suggesting bias, hinting at motive. But Lillian met every charge with composed resolve. I am a businesswoman, she said. My livelihood rests on honesty. I would not risk it with a lie. My husband witnessed this survey. He told me about it. The map is real. Judge Samuel Crowe nodded once, then turned to the surveyor. Mr. Edwin Pike, produce your field notes. Pike swallowed. My field notes, Your Honor? Yes, your original measurements. I want them compared to your final report. Pike fumbled through his satchel and handed over a leather journal. The judge read, his expression darkening with each page. These notes indicate a creek shift of approximately 40 to 60 feet, he said coldly. Your report claims 200 yards. A murmur rippled through the room. That is a significant discrepancy, Mr. Pike. Care to explain? Pike glanced at Silas Crowe, panic flashing across his face. I must have made a calculation error. An error? The judge repeated, flipping pages. And these entries, written in different ink, appear to be later additions, altering measurements and conclusions. He fixed Pike with a hard stare. Mr. Pike, were you paid to falsify this report? The courtroom went utterly still. Pike's voice broke. He looked at the crowded benches, the weight of it pressing him down. His shoulders slumped. Yes, he whispered. Yes. Mr. Crowe paid me $500 to change the survey in his favor. The room erupted. Judge Samuel Crowe struck the gavel again and again until the noise died. Silas Crowe sprang to his feet, face flushed, shouting denials, claiming conspiracy. But the judge no longer looked at him. He looked at the field notes, at Eli Boone's map, at Lillian Chen's unwavering testimony. Then he brought the gavel down once more. "Order." "I have heard enough," he said. "The evidence is clear. Mr. Pike's survey was fraudulent, conducted to facilitate land theft. Eli Boone's original claim is valid and stands as filed. The boundaries are those marked on the original map." He turned to Silas Crow. "Your claim is denied. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor for investigation of fraud and attempted theft." Clara's knees buckled. Luke Calder caught her, steadying her as the truth settled in. They had won. Silas Crow was not finished. He pointed at Clara, his voice snarling. "This isn't over. You think a piece of paper—" "Mr. Crow." Judge Samuel Crow cut in, voice like ice. "One more word and I will hold you in contempt." He gestured. "Sheriff." No, Sheriff Clay Turner, uneasy but resolute, stepped forward. For a moment it seemed Crow might resist. Then he shook off the sheriff's hand, straightened his coat, and walked out with what dignity he could muster, pausing only to glare back at Clara, hatred burning in his eyes. Legally, it was finished. Personally, it was not. Still, they had won. Clara turned to Luke, tears spilling, and he pulled her into his arms there in the open hall. Applause broke out, voices rising, frontier folk pressing in to congratulate them, celebrating the rare victory of the steadfast over the powerful. Lillian Chen pressed through the crowd and clasped Clara Boone's hands. "Your father would be proud," she said, her eyes shining. "So very proud." "Thank you," Clara answered softly, "for everything." Reverend Amos Reed appeared beside them, smiling wide. "Justice," he said. "Every now and then, it finds its way through." They remained in the hall for nearly an hour, accepting congratulations, answering questions, slowly allowing themselves to believe it was real. The land was theirs. The danger had passed. They were safe. Spring came to the Wyoming Territory like a promise finally kept. Snow melted away, revealing stone walls that had survived their first winter without a single crack or shift. The garden plot lay ready for planting, and Clara's chickens were laying again, fat, content, clucking happily in their repaired coop. 6 months had passed since the hearing. 6 months since Judge Samuel Crow had ruled in Clara's favor and sent Silas Crow slinking away in disgrace. The territorial prosecutor had filed fraud charges against both Crow and the surveyor. Though the cases still wound slowly through the courts, Silas Crow left Red Hollow not long after the hearing, his reputation ruined, his influence gone. The last anyone heard, he had sold his ranch and headed east. "Good riddance," the town said. "Should have happened years ago." Clara stood on the porch of the cabin, her cabin now, legally and undeniably, and watched Luke Calder working on the new addition. They had married in December, a small winter ceremony in Lillian Chen's parlor, Reverend Amos Reed officiating, half the town crowded in despite the cold. The same people who had once avoided Clara now greeted her warmly, treating her as one of their own. But it wasn't the court victory alone that changed how they saw her. It was the way she carried herself now, the steady confidence, the lifted chin. Luke always beside her. No apology, no expectation of rejection. Confidence, it turned out, was contagious, and Clara had earned hers through fire, stone, and stubborn resolve. The addition was Luke's idea. A bedroom off the main cabin, a space meant to become a nursery. Clara was expecting, due in early summer, and they were equally terrified and thrilled. "You're supposed to be resting," Luke called when he noticed her on the porch. "I'm standing," Clara replied. "That's practically resting." Luke climbed down from the roof, wiping sweat from his brow. The midwife said. I know what the midwife said. Clara cut in gently. And I'm being careful. But I'm pregnant, Luke. Not broken. He pulled her close, one hand settling over the gentle curve of her belly. The baby kicked, strong and sudden. They both felt it. Luke's face lit with awe and fear all at once. Strong kick, he murmured. Takes after her mother, Clara said with a smile. Or her father, Luke countered. They didn't know whether it was a boy or a girl, and they didn't care. Only that the baby would be healthy, and that Clara would come through the birth safely. They didn't speak often of that fear, but it lived quietly between them. The memory of Mary Calder and little Rose, the loss Luke carried like a scar. But this time would be different, they told themselves. Clara was strong, the midwife was skilled, and they were no longer alone. Lillian Chen arrived that afternoon with baby clothes she had sewn. Tiny gowns, soft blankets, in careful, neutral colors. She had become something like a grandmother to them, visiting often, offering advice, helping Clara prepare. Your mother would be proud, Lillian said, watching Clara fold the small garments with reverent hands. Your father, too, not just for the walls in the cabin, but for the life you've built, the partnership, the future. Clara touched the cameo brooch she wore every day, Mary's brooch. I think about them often, my parents, Mary, little Rose. Sometimes it feels like they're here, watching, blessing this. I believe they are, Lillian said simply. That evening, after she left, Clara and Luke walked the perimeter of their land. It had become a habit, this quiet ritual of guarding what they had fought to keep. The stone wall stood solid and true, just as Luke had promised. The garden rows showed green shoots pushing through the soil. The barn stood repaired and expanded, ready now for a horse, a milk cow, and the chickens. It wasn't just land anymore. It was a home. Yet beyond the repairs and additions, the land itself felt changed. It no longer felt like something merely owned or defended. It felt like home. Not just Clara Boone's home or Luke Calder's home, but theirs. A place they had protected side by side, shaped together, claimed through sweat, fear, and a stubborn kind of love that refused to bend. They stopped at the northwest corner where the great cornerstone rested, the one they had set together in those first uncertain days. Clara laid her palm against the cool stone, and Luke placed his hand over hers. You built something that will outlast us, Luke said softly, repeating words he had spoken long ago. Clara smiled and shook her head. We built it together, she corrected. And it's not just the wall, Luke. It's this, us, the life we're making. That's what will last. Luke drew her close as her swollen belly allowed, and pressed a kiss to the crown of her head. I love you, he said simply. I never thought I'd say that again. Never thought I'd feel it again. But here we are, Clara said, leaning back against him, watching the sun sink behind their land. Here we are, Luke agreed. They talked about baby names. They talked about planting more acreage next spring, maybe keeping a few sheep. They spoke of the future in a way that once would have felt impossible. With hope, with plans, with the quiet certainty that whatever came, they would face it together. As darkness settled and the first stars emerged, they walked back toward the cabin, hand in hand. Moonlight stretched the shadows of the stone walls across the ground, standing watch over the life within. Tomorrow there would be work on the addition. Tomorrow Lillian Chen would likely stop by again with advice and supplies. Tomorrow Reverend Amos Reed might ride out, as he often did, to check on them. But tonight, they had this stillness, this sense of having fought for something worth keeping, and won. Clara paused at the cabin door and looked back at the walls one last time. "My father used to say a person's worth is measured by what they build," she said quietly. "Not just with their hands, but with their lives. He said the best builders leave the world better than they found it." "Then we're doing all right," Luke said. "Just look at what we've built, and what we're still building." Clara smiled and stepped inside, Luke following. The cabin was warm, the fire steady and bright, and the future, their future, stretched ahead like a road already traveled together. Sometimes the world judges by appearances instead of worth, but the right person sees the truth. And when two people truly see each other, fully and without fear, and choose to build together despite every obstacle, that changes everything. The stone walls would stand for generations, a testament to resolve and love. But the real monument lived inside the cabin, in the life they shared, the family they were creating, and the simple, enduring truth that sometimes, against all odds, love wins. And that, Clara thought as she settled beside her husband, feeling their child stir beneath her heart, was worth more than all the stone walls in the world. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting, as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deep fakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.